Hey folks, so today I'm going to be doing a behind the scenes look on the short film that I just put out on YouTube, Boxed. That is a short film I shot completely on my own. We're doing a shelter in place during this quarantine period, and I basically had to shoot, edit, and star in a short by myself. I was doing that as a kind of a creative exercise while being bored in the house, and it was an interesting process. There's a lot of aspects of it that are pretty neat and pretty creative, and then there's also a lot of things that are very typical of how I normally prepare for a shoot like this. So I thought it'd be fun to dive into some behind the scenes look about how that film came to be. It's only about a minute and a half film. If you haven't seen it, just jump back a video. I have it up right now. It's a short little horror film that I just conceived in a night, shot it over the course of maybe like 4 nights, just shooting a couple scenes a night. It took a lot longer because I was on my own, obviously. Yeah, it was a really good thing to do, especially during this time. So hopefully this behind the scenes stuff will interest you, either to do your own or if you're just curious as to how some of this gets made. So let's jump over into the editing program here. You see that it's only about a minute and a half. Like I said, it's about a dozen or so shots, and there's a couple of effects things happening near the end. But it wasn't that complicated. It just took a little while because, like I said, I was on my own. So let's jump way back into exactly the preparation for this. So I do what's called, especially right now, I do what's called morning pages, where you just kind of write what's on your mind in the morning. For me, it's like a combination of like journaling, but also just any kind of random idea that pops in my head, I'll throw it down there. And then if it's something worth looking at later, I'll do that. So that kind of came from there. I just had this thought about, this time of during quarantine, it feels like we're just, trapped in the box inside of our house. And then I just elaborated on what that would be and in terms of a horror short. There wasn't any real writing of it. I basically just storyboarded it all. I love to sketch and doodle, and I have an app called Procreate. And I essentially just moved one scene at a time. I knew what areas of my house. I knew I had my living room space, my garage space, some of the hallways. I wasn't trying to shoot outside at all. I was trying to kind of abide by the shelter in place. So but I did shoot like a scene right outside my house during night. And again, all this was during night. I have a wife and a kid, and the house is pretty well occupied. So I knew I'd be doing this at nighttime. It was very rainy at the time, so I just kind of worked with those elements. But you can see my sketches aren't great. I just jot them down, and I jot some basic scene descriptions, like I'm looking down the stairs, or I'm doing this. Things, maybe some camera movement, some camera indications. But really my sketches are just to iron out framing, composition, and some lighting contrast. I don't really tend to get to it too detailed except for where I want to add darkness and light and make sure I have that contrast. So this stuff really helps me out in just not missing anything on the days that I'm shooting. Because, for me, I do a lot of documentary style, and my narrative stuff isn't as rich as that, and so my mind doesn't work quite as fluidly when it comes to narrative. So I do need to give myself a lot more pre-pro time than otherwise necessary. And I think it's probably true for a lot of people. And a lot of people, even filmmakers only make movies every so often. So coming in with a plan is really good. So we don't waste time. You don't shoot the wrong things. And for here, I can get things like eye lines correct. Make sure that I'm just basically nailing everything that I want to nail to get the point across. So shooting it. So just production. Let's talk about that. The gear that I use for this stuff is I basically have a tripod. It's like a little travel tripod, a Manfrotto that I bring everywhere when I travel, and it's pretty light and handy. And then I have my GH5 here. And the GH5, I use a combination of the 12 to 35 lens that opens up to like 2.8. And then I have a set of Rokinons, the EFs, that I convert those. So this was a combination of mostly the 35 and 50 millimeter. I think I used the 80 for a couple close-ups, but I mainly worked in 35 and 50. And then the 12 to 35 I used for some of the wider shots. You can see that there wasn't a whole lot of wide shots in this, mainly because I just didn't have, I didn't want to set deck areas of my house. Like I knew the spaces I was working in were pretty tight, and for the minute, I really wanted this to be like a minute and a half, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time establishing, playing out. Obviously, I couldn't play out oneers and wider shots because it's just me. So I need to just really target and pinpoint certain shots. And the best and most efficient way to do that for me was just using those tights. So a majority of the film is tights, and that, again, was like the 35 up close or the 50, and then again, the 85 only a couple times. And then the 12 to 35 for the wider shots like the stairway when I wanted to make the area look a lot bigger than it was. I went really wide there. For lighting, this is kind of what took a little while because it's a residency, it's a house. You just turn on all the lights of the house, and you tend to get shots that don't look quite natural. I guess that's a weird thing to say, being that those are the natural environments in the house. But one thing I did float was, what if I shot this in black and white? Mainly because I wouldn't have to deal with color contrast or color crossovers or color bleeds. I can just turn on light and just play with the values, just the brightness and the darkness, and that way I can use every single light possible. But in the end, I thought, like, I got the time. I'm not doing anything, and I might not even finish this film. I might not even put it out there. That was kind of my thinking. I just needed to do something. I was kind of going a little stir crazy. So, sure, why not spend time doing one of my favorite things in the world, and that's lighting sets in a fun way. And so for lighting, I did a combination of things. I brought out stuff like the Aperture 300D and the 120D. These are daylight LED fixtures that are pack a lot of punch. And I didn't actually use those too much. I use those for some like area lights. So I'd shoot those off in the distance. Let me see if I can bring up some shots here. Like this shot, for example, where I'm just in the house. So I did have the Aperture 120D, pointing away. So if I had the camera here, I'm pointing this thing backwards towards me, and it's hitting a wall that's pretty far off, and basically just turning that wall into one giant soft light source. So I'm getting some ambient light from that 120D shooting backwards into a wall. And then over in the, I kind of wanted to play around with the teal. I know it's overdone, but the teal orange color contrast a little bit. And so I set up a couple small lights in different areas of this house. So I've been using these, and this is probably the MVP of this shoot, is these Aperture, God, what are they? They're, I'll put a link at the bottom, but they're basically these little portable waterproof lights that Aperture makes, and they're powered and charged by USB-C, and I have two of them. And I also have these Aperture M90s, and these are just very small lights that have quite a bit of power. If I turn them on, I mean, I can adjust them. I can adjust just the brightness and contrast. I have gels, but just the brightness and contrast, and they go pretty bright and pack a lot of power, and then you can do like effects if you want to do like a faulty bulb, a TV, lightning, or fireworks. I didn't do any of that. I just used them as lights. And then for the color contrasting, I would throw up these gels. I have, it comes with like these color gels that just essentially just stick on there. And so for the areas that I want a little warmer, I'd pop those in. And then for the areas that when cooler, I'd go blue. And then I would basically just dial in a color temperature that gave me the look that I wanted to go for. I try to get as much stuff in camera. I do love color grading in post-production, but I didn't want to spend too much time doing that. Again, I had a lot of time to really play with this, and so I really wanted to dial in my in-camera techniques. I rarely ever actually just shot this at me or shot this at things. So let's look back at this shot here. Actually, let me take off the 4x3 pillar. So you can actually see it in this shot here. I basically had it, I used the Joby GorillaPod here, and you can see that I mounted it on this baby gate here, mounted the light, and then I put a piece of foam core right here, just a white piece of foam core, and I just bounced the orange, I think that was the blue, maybe that was the orange. I bounced one of the lights into the foam core to essentially make that smaller light source bigger, and then push out and get less like harsh shadows, so it looks a little more natural. And then I took one of the apertures and went blue, and then put that in the hallway here. On the right-hand side, there's a hallway, and I put that blue to push out. I think I was pushing that out against the wall, so I had it angled, hitting the wall and letting that bounce out, just to give it a little bit of color contrast, especially in that lower end there. So it wasn't as powerful as the other light, but it was giving off a little bit of color temperature, blue to give it some depth. You know, it's a very flat image. It's very there's just two walls there, but I wanted to give depth and do that through color contrast. And then you can see that the aperture light over here is giving me my key, and then everything else is filling out. And the whole scene doesn't look too lit. That was my big concern. I didn't want to just throw a light there and make the whole thing look lit. I wanted it to look natural. And then moving on, same thing. I'm using the same lighting grid here. I think I physically moved myself a little bit closer to the light to pick up some more, so to do too much adjustments. All the same setup. So this, I actually turned on the lights. I turned on the LED lights in my house. And then I did have to color grade this just a little bit to match, but yeah, I didn't mind silhouetting myself too much there. Same thing there. That's all just natural housing light. There wasn't much light going on there. And then this, I just moved the aperture. I used the small guy, and I just kind of, in one hand, I was holding it just to give it a little bit of highlight off the door handle as I walked out. So this is where things started getting a little more crazy and complicated. Obviously, I have those practical lights, those bulbs. I use that for my tested videos, so that's all kind of dulled out and dimmed in a way that doesn't flare at the camera too bad. But that doesn't give off a whole lot of light. So what I did was I motivated another, I think you can see it here. Again, the pillars kind of help me hide things. So that's the shot. That's everything else. And so what you can see there is you can see right here, you see the aperture. Let me pause. I'm going to get the name of this light. It's the Aperture ALMW. Aperture ALMW light. I had that right over here giving me a motivated a light source. So since all of these hanging string lights are all kind of orangey, I matched the orange and then shot that out towards me to give myself some backlight of that orange. And then on the opposite end here, I had the 120D bouncing against essentially this wall here, because that sets right to the right of me, bouncing that bluer light, that bluer daylight off of there to give me a larger source, and it's a little bit of fill, and also just a little bit of that blue color. So I get the orange in the back and the blue, especially you can see that blue on that gray shirt there to go for that teal and orange. I really like the way that shot. That's a very nice looking shot to me. I'm very proud of that one. Again, this is all just static shots. I'm just using my tripod. I'm using my tripod. I'm setting up a shot in two ways. I have my monitor here. I have a small HD monitor and about a 30-foot HDMI cable. And so I'm able to do this essentially. Sit there with the camera, kind of look at myself. Oh, I'm not in focus. Kind of walk back, focus myself up, frame up the shot, get my blocking, all while holding the monitor. And then right before I'm ready, I put the monitor down, and then I do my scene. One other thing that helped me out on this was this cosmetology head. They use this for hair styling. My wife was in cosmetology school for a while, and I still have this head left over. So I would mount this on a C-stand, and that's the way I would get focus and try out lighting schematics. But as you can see, the skin tones are way different. There's just not the natural skin tone there. So oftentimes I would light for her, and then I'd walk in like, oh boy, and then I would have to adjust lights for me. And then that's kind of why, that's why it took so long. If I had a real human body to stand in and be that lighting source for me, or that lighting reference, then I'll be able to do this a lot faster. But yeah, key was the monitor, because the flip out screen, the GH5, while great, does not do, it's just too far. Your eyes, you can't trust your eyes, and you can't trust autofocus on that thing. So using the monitor to make sure my shots were all in focus and my lighting looked well was key, and that small issue monitor was great. So this is one of the few shots that I used movement on. I have a slider, like a manual slider, an old Alex manual slider. Just put the camera on there, slid it. I don't think I changed the lighting setup too much. I think I just angled the orange light down a bit. And I did add one thing. You can see there's like dust. There's some atmosphere there, some dust going through. I have a bunch of dust in this shop because I do some woodworking and some cutting boards, and I actually keep handfuls of dust to use for like filler. And so what I did was, hold on, I have these lights here. These are Relio squares. I actually did a review of these on Tested, and I still have a couple lying around. And they have this little, what are they called, snoots. It basically just centers the light into a beam. And I use this little grip clip kind of thing that has a mount for a 1/8 screw. And I basically just had these mounted in certain areas of the shop. And I have two color temperatures. I have daylight and I have tungsten. And so I just chose what color I needed, and I shot a beam. And then I blew some dust to give it some of that. And it'll probably a little overkill, but whatever. That looks cool. And then just slid that through a couple times. I think all of these I probably did about 2 to 3 takes, just because I couldn't trust myself exactly. and I needed to see everything later on. And sometimes like the first takes were great, and I had the other two as safeties. So I did about 3, thinking that I would need one for safety, and it helped because I did mess up a lot of the first takes in these. Here's the shop. The space is a lot smaller than what required for this, so I kind of had to cheat a little bit and make it feel like it's a little bit bigger. So this vantage point seems like you're a little bit further away, but you're actually really close to that box. And then what I did was I had a string just gaff taped to the side, and then pulled the string and then shot a plate. So I had the box being moved by me, and then the plate, I took everything out and just kept the camera and the tripod completely there and shot the plate. And then I went into After Effects and I used like a wire removal. I basically did like a masking and masked out as much as the string as I could, and then did what's called the wire removal tool that helps you point A, point B, and kind of erase wires and threads in shots. So that's what I did there. That light, what did I do for that light? So that one, I wanted it to, so this is interesting, I wanted it to be exaggerated. I wanted it to be like a spotlight, like a cartoony spotlight. Boom! But I didn't want that like Bob Richardson style spotlight. I didn't want like a big hard light coming straight down. I still wanted to give it a little bit of softness and nuance, even though how silly and cartoony it is. So what I did was I got a beadboard or like a foam core. You can use a foam core. I used a beadboard, and I had a beadboard on what do they call the Quaker clamps on a C-stand right above the box, right over where the camera sees. And then I took the 120D, and I believe I put a orange gel on it, and I beamed it. I think I used black wrap, and I made it into a beam, and I shot it at the top of the beadboard and let the beadboard bounce down. And because the 120D, the 300, maybe it was 300, but so powerful and so narrow, I was able to like hit that and then let that like bounce back down, and that kind of washed this spotlight over it and gave it a nice roll off there, so it didn't look too spotty or too harsh of shadows. You can see there's like that shadow on the right there, but that's all right. And then I don't know what else was. I think everything else was there might have been already set up. What else we got? Let's see. So for this setup, I did a couple times. This started what would have been the rest of the way I would kind of shoot the rest of these. Was I was using the 120D or the 300D shot against a full wall. I have a wall, there's a bunch of stuff on it, but like it's light enough in value that it helps bounce it. I gave it a little bit of warmth with a gel. I believe it was it was either a CTO or something a little bit lighter, like half that. But basically just gave it a little bit of orangeness, bounced it, just turned my wall into a light source, and just I didn't want it to be head on. Like I wanted it to be a little more side lit, because head on would have been a little too high key, wouldn't have been as scary. So I gave myself a little bit of side light there. In the back, I had those orange lights kind of lighten this thing up. And then I used the aperture lights. I can't remember the name all of a sudden again. Behind me on that same Gorilla Pod, just shooting me with continuing that blue backlight look. This is, if there's one thing I do not like about it, is I didn't spend enough time getting this shot correctly. I used, again, I'm bouncing off the wall to the right. I have something over here shooting the box to give it a little bit of fill, but I just don't like how I came out exposed. I didn't expose well for myself. The coloring wasn't great. Yeah, it's one of those things for me, I just can't unsee. Similar lighting setup, and I did use color correction to like bring up the blood just a little bit, give it some more saturation, give it some more color. It's like night and day, right? So this one I exposed it correctly, and I think I brought in the aperture to bounce a little bit closer to a beadboard. The second of the moving shots, this is a diaper box that I had lying around, and then there's some paint and then a bunch of wet water sprayed in there just to give it a little bit of gloss. I think I did that handheld, just moving the camera around as if my movement. And then we go over to here, another one which was exposed rather incorrectly, but yeah, I don't know how I feel about this one. But what I did there is I just moved that light over to bounce off the wall. So it's bouncing off the wall here to give me a very subtle far side key. And then I was okay kind of engulfing myself in darkness. I might have decorated this area a little bit differently if I was to do it again. And then I walk up into much harsher light. So I think I was using an orange light for this part, and I didn't change it out. So continuity's sake, I mean, whatever. Continuity-wise, this probably should have been a blue, since that was the direction that the blue light was coming. But here, I'm using it as the orange. I'm using the wall, again, as a light source, and it's giving me a little bit of highlight there, which is nice. And then I want a little bit dirty foreground, so I get that bike in there. And then the bike spokes, I used the tungsten style Relio squared to shoot through the bike in front of me to really get those spokes to glow, to give it some bokeh, some nice difference in the shot when using that. When using the dirty foreground. Cut back to me. I shot a lot of myself in reverse. So I shot myself doing my things backwards and then played it in reverse in Premiere to make it look awkward or odd. Kind of like a horror element that I wanted to try out. And then here was just a lot of After Effects. So I knew what was coming was going to be a lot of like just editing tricks, speeding up time, moving things around. But if I can just sell the first shot, the finger breaking, then the viewer's mind would kind of fill in the horror of the rest. So I really wanted to get this done right. And it's okay. it's as best as I can do. But I basically shot my hand, and then I moved my hand in different directions, and then just masked out, rotoscoped, and took out images, and then just spent a lot of time in After Effects. I don't want to dive in too deep in After Effects, especially because my process isn't probably the most efficient way to do it. But yeah, I knew I was going to use sound design a lot, bring that finger up, and then just start messing with the speed. This is obviously just pushing my foot outside the shoe. And then the neck was another one I wanted to do. So I did my same thing that I did with the fingers. I shot myself, and then I like angled my head and shot another one, angled my head even further and shot, and then I got out and gave myself a plate. And that way I can rotoscope out the head. Right there, it cracks back. And it's actually subtle. I don't know if a lot of people catch what's happening with the head there. But it just looks odd enough to where it looks kind of creepy, and I liked it. So that was the final thing, and then I cut the bottom of the box out, used the box cutter, cut the bottom of the box out, got inside of it, got the camera tight, and then I closed it up, and then hit record, and then pushed myself out of the box, and then played that in reverse, so it looks like I'm going in, the box is closing. And then I put some red paint in my eyes, make it look like blood is just kind of popping out of my eyeballs. And then for this one, I grabbed my wife and we closed the box, put a very, very light piece of tape on it, grabbed 2 strings and taped them to each side of the box. And then I said, okay, 1, 2, 3, and we yanked up the box. The box opened up. And then I played it in reverse, went into After Effects, did that same wire removal tool. I got the plate of it, so I had the clean background. Used the wire removal tool, and then the box closes. And then we go to the title sequence, and then it goes into like this last shot where everything opens up. So we've been in 4:3 pillar mode for so long, mainly because this guy's so confined to sheltering in. His life's very small, and as he eventually kind of crushes into the box, hence the box aspect ratio. And then as the villain kind of goes out into the world, we jump out into 16:9. As the world kind of enlarges, and also being that like at this time right now going outside is a very scary thing. I thought the villain ending on the shot, having the villain being out in the world, seemed prescient, seemed right to do. For this, obviously the lights were just going on here. I used this guy on the gorilla. I think I had the tripod shooting me. The tripod with the camera shooting me, and then I gorilla potted this light with the blue filter onto one of the legs and shot against the wall behind me. So there's a wall behind the camera, and then using that wall as a bounce for the blue. So I mean, if you really look at most of my lighting designs, you can probably say like everything's being bounced off of things. I rarely ever hit a light against something. I usually bounce it at an area or use the beadboard to help direct it, but I always trying to soften it, giving it something to bounce through, making that light source much bigger, giving it a much more natural look, and then using that to help soften it, and then playing with color contrast in ways that kind of bouncing between unnatural, natural lighting with unnatural color contrast. And that's kind of what I wanted. That was the look that I decided on when I decided I wanted to play with these lights. Yeah, and then music and sound design. I got a lot of these clips were just sound taken from libraries, but then I did do a little bit of sound design. You can see here, I just grabbed this mic and threw it on the ground and just did footsteps, I did pieces of wood kind of falling off each other. So like when the bad guy is kind of being created, it almost sounds like his body is sort of like building blocks coming together. Did a lot of like the grunts and the gurgles when I was dying. Did all that just here in the garage, and then grabbed some music from the libraries we used and scored it up. And honestly, the editing took me pretty much faster than I thought it would be. I'm usually a very slow editor when it comes to this kind of stuff, narrative stuff. I shot a short film, Fractured, and that took me so long to edit, mainly because I worked in a bunch of VFX shots that I didn't know exactly how to do. I spent way too much time thinking about sound design because it was sound heavy. I was just questioning myself. With this, I just wanted to move, and I just listened to my gut a lot of the times, and I listened to things, played a couple times, and did my tweaking here and there. But when I felt happy, just move on to the next thing. Get this out. A minute and a half shelter in short shot by myself. I wasn't very precious about it. I just wanted to create something and use the tools that I have and have amassed over the years to do so. So there you go. Starting from the storyboard, the idea, the storyboard, the shooting to editing. I mean, there's like a week of off hours of time I wasn't working, time I just spent at home. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope this behind the scenes offers you something interesting or helps you motivate to go make your own little short, especially during this time when we are at home and we have to be creative about being creative. So thank you guys for checking this out, and stay safe, and hopefully you'll see me in another short soon where I'll be talking about this some more. Take care. Bye.